Wyatt Teller just did something in his final moments as a Cleveland Brown that's going to trigger the most significant rule change the NFL has implemented in over a decade. And what he said during his emotional exit is exposing a problem that goes far beyond just the Browns' dysfunction. Teller didn't just request a trade and leave quietly like most players do when they want out. He called a press conference, brought receipts in the form of text messages and recorded conversations, and delivered a 20-minute statement that detailed systematic mistreatment of players by the Cleveland Browns organization that violates the spirit, if not the letter, of NFL conduct policies. And the specific examples Teller provided: contracts promised then revoked, medical treatments delayed for financial reasons, personal family situations exploited during negotiations, are so egregious that the NFL Players Association immediately filed a formal grievance, and multiple U.S. senators who oversee sports labor issues announced they're launching an investigation. But here's the truly explosive part. Teller revealed that what he experienced in Cleveland isn't unique, that he's been in contact with players from at least 6 other NFL teams who've experienced similar abuses, and that they're coordinating a collective action that could fundamentally change the power dynamic between players and ownership across the entire league. The massive NFL change this is sparking isn't just about Cleveland. It's about whether players will finally have protections that prevent owners from treating them as disposable assets rather than human beings. The press conference was scheduled for 3 p.m. on Thursday, February 19, 2026, at a hotel conference room in downtown Cleveland, deliberately chosen as neutral territory away from the Browns' facility. When reporters arrived, they found Wyatt Teller seated at a table with his agent, an attorney from the NFL Players Association, and another attorney who specializes in employment law and player rights issues. The presence of that legal firepower immediately signaled that this wasn't going to be a typical player departure press conference where someone thanks the organization and talks about new opportunities. This was something else entirely. Teller waited until every reporter was seated and every camera was focused before he began speaking, and what came out over the next 22 minutes was one of the most detailed and damning indictments of an NFL organization that any active player has ever delivered publicly. Teller started by explaining that what happened with his contract extension was just the final straw in a pattern of behavior by the Cleveland Browns that he'd tolerated for too long, hoping things would improve. Then he laid out specific incidents, complete with dates, names, and supporting documentation that he displayed on a screen behind him. The first incident Teller described occurred in 2023 when he was dealing with an elbow injury that required surgery. According to Teller, the Browns' medical staff recommended immediate surgery to repair the damage and prevent long-term complications, but team executives delayed approving the surgery for over 3 weeks while they tried to restructure Teller's contract to protect themselves financially in case the surgery didn't go well and he couldn't perform. Teller said he was told explicitly by someone in the front office that the surgery approval was contingent on him agreeing to contractual language that would reduce his guaranteed money if he wasn't able to return to full performance levels. Teller showed text messages on the screen behind him that appeared to support this claim, including messages from a Browns executive discussing the surgery delay in relation to contract discussions. That revelation alone would have been explosive, but Teller wasn't finished. He described a second incident from 2024 when his wife was pregnant with their first child and experiencing complications that required her to be on bed rest for multiple months. According to Teller, he requested permission to miss some voluntary workouts to be with his wife during this difficult time, and the Browns initially granted that permission. But then, according to Teller, when contract extension negotiations began later that year, Browns executives brought up his absences from those voluntary workouts as evidence that he wasn't fully committed to the team, and they used that as justification for offering him less money than market value. Teller said having his family situation weaponized against him during contract negotiations was one of the most personally painful things he'd experienced in his career, and he showed emails that appeared to reference his workout absences in the context of contract discussions. The third incident Teller described was the one that directly led to his departure, and he provided more detail than had previously been reported about the meeting with Jimmy Haslam. According to Teller's account, Haslam didn't just question his performance and effort. Haslam allegedly told Teller that the Browns had been tracking his social media activity and noticed that he'd been posting about business ventures and personal interests, and that this suggested he was more focused on his off-field activities than on football. Teller said he was shocked that the organization was monitoring his social media and using it as supposed evidence of divided focus, and that when he pushed back and pointed out that what he does in his personal time is his business as long as he performs on the field, Haslam allegedly told him that players who make the kind of money Teller wants to make don't have personal time, that everything they do reflects on the organization and can be considered in contract negotiations. That statement from Haslam, if accurate as Teller claims, represents a level of intrusion into players' lives that goes well beyond what's typical or acceptable in NFL employment relationships. And Teller wasn't the only player experiencing this. According to what Teller revealed next, he'd been in contact with current and former players from the Philadelphia Eagles, Miami Dolphins, New York Jets, Las Vegas Raiders, Washington Commanders, and Carolina Panthers who describe similar experiences where teams used personal situations, social media monitoring, medical situations, or other non-football factors as leverage in contract negotiations or as justifications for releasing or trading players. Teller said these conversations among players had been happening informally for months, but that his experience with the Browns pushed him to go public and coordinate with other players to bring systematic attention to these practices. And that's when Teller made the announcement that's going to change everything. He revealed that the NFL Players Association, with support from over 200 players who've signed a petition, is proposing a new addition to the collective bargaining agreement that would establish player rights protections specifically around contract negotiations, medical decisions, and personal privacy. The proposed language, according to Teller, would prohibit teams from delaying medical treatments for contract-related reasons, prohibit teams from using players' personal family situations or social media activity as factors in contract evaluations, and establish independent arbitration processes where players can challenge teams that violate these protections. The NFL Players Association attorney who was present at the press conference confirmed that this proposal has been formally submitted to the NFL League office, and that if the league doesn't agree to implement these protections voluntarily, the union is prepared to make it a central demand in the next round of CBA negotiations. The reaction to Teller's press conference was immediate and seismic. Within minutes, the hashtag #ProtectPlayers started trending nationally. Within an hour, several prominent players from other teams posted messages supporting Teller and confirming that they'd experienced similar treatment from their own teams. By evening, 2 U.S. senators, one from Ohio and one from Florida, announced they're requesting briefings from the NFL about player treatment practices and whether federal labor protections need to be strengthened in professional sports. And by the next morning, the NFL League office issued a statement saying they take player welfare seriously and are reviewing the matters raised by Teller and will work with the NFLPA to address any concerns. But the most significant reaction came from players themselves. According to sources within the NFLPA, the number of players signing the petition for contract negotiation protections jumped from 200 to over 500 within 24 hours of Teller's press conference. Players who had been reluctant to speak publicly about their experiences started sharing stories on social media and with reporters about times when they felt teams had exploited personal situations or used non-football factors against them in contract discussions. The collective nature of the response, the fact that this isn't just about Cleveland or just about Wyatt Teller, but about a systematic problem across multiple teams, is what's giving this movement momentum and making it clear that the NFL is going to have to address it seriously.
Inside the Cleveland Browns organization, according to sources, the reaction to Teller's press conference has been panic and furious internal conflict about how to respond. Jimmy Haslam, according to sources, wanted to immediately issue a statement denying Teller's allegations and accusing him of lying to damage the organization's reputation. But the Browns' legal team, according to sources, strongly advised against that approach because Teller had documentation supporting his claims and because going after him publicly could expose the organization to defamation claims if they couldn't prove he was lying. Andrew Berry, according to sources, held an emergency meeting with key staff to review internal communications and figure out whether there are other situations where the organization's practices could be challenged under the player protections being proposed. And according to sources, what that review uncovered was concerning enough that the Browns have retained outside employment law counsel to advise them. Todd Monken, according to sources, is furious that he was kept in the dark about the extent of the Browns' problematic practices in contract negotiations and player relations, and he's told people close to him that if he'd known the organization was operating this way, he never would have accepted the head coaching job. Monken reportedly confronted Haslam and Berry about why he wasn't informed about the medical delay situation with Teller's surgery or about the social media monitoring, and according to sources, that conversation devolved into shouting, with Monken accusing ownership of undermining his ability to coach by creating a toxic environment that players don't trust, and Haslam defending the organization's practices as standard business operations. The trade market for Wyatt Teller, which was already expected to be active, exploded after his press conference because teams viewed acquiring him not just as getting a great player, but as making a statement of support for player rights and distancing themselves from the Browns' practices. According to sources, within 48 hours of the press conference, the Browns received serious trade offers from 8 different teams, and the compensation being offered was significantly higher than what Cleveland would have gotten if this had been a normal trade request, because teams were competing to be seen as the organization that treats players right. The Browns ultimately traded Teller to the Kansas City Chiefs for a second-round pick and a fourth-round pick, which is strong value, but also represents the Chiefs making a statement that they want to be associated with doing right by players. The broader NFL implications of Teller's exit and the movement it sparked are still unfolding, but the direction is clear. The league is going to have to implement meaningful player protections in contract negotiations and medical decisions, either voluntarily or through the next CBA negotiation process. Teams that have been using personal situations, social media monitoring, or medical leverage in contract discussions are going to have to change their practices or face grievances and potentially lose players who refuse to tolerate that treatment. And the power dynamic between players and ownership is shifting in ways that could fundamentally change how the business of football operates at the team level. For the Cleveland Browns specifically, the Teller situation is another devastating blow to an organization that's been in crisis mode for weeks. They've lost an elite player, exposed practices that make it harder to attract free agents or retain talent, and generated negative national attention that reinforces every negative stereotype about the franchise. Jimmy Haslam's position as owner is more precarious than ever, with legitimate questions about whether the NFL will allow him to continue operating in ways that create these kinds of problems. And Todd Monken's position as head coach is complicated by the fact that he's trying to build a winning culture in an organization whose ownership practices undermine everything he's trying to establish. As of now, the movement that Wyatt Teller's emotional exit sparked is gaining momentum daily. More players are coming forward with their stories. The NFLPA is building its case for new protections. Congressional interest is growing, and the NFL is being forced to confront uncomfortable truths about how some teams treat players and whether the league's current rules and protections are adequate. The massive change that's coming won't happen overnight, but it's coming. And when the history of this moment is written, Wyatt Teller's decision to go public with documentation and coordinate with other players will be remembered as the catalyst that finally forced the NFL to do better.